Hey, welcome back to Beyond Sunday. We're so grateful that you've tuned in for episode 7. So we're beyond the halfway mark on our first year of doing this podcast. And for all of you guys who've been just getting in touch and letting us know how you've connected with the podcast and have been sharing it out and giving reviews, just thank you so much for doing that. And today it's such an honor to have Lee Grady with us today. Lee Grady is a friend of the Springs Church. He's come and he's shared and he has inputted and imparted into the life of our church many times. And he's got a long career in ministry, and we're going to unpack that today. We're going to walk through some of the experiences and the things that Lee has been involved with. Lee, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Owen. It's great to be on with you.
Absolutely. And Lee, I mean, starting straight off, I really want to delve into a large part of your ministry life, which was as a Christian journalist for Charisma magazine. Tell us how Lee Grady, growing up in Georgia or down in the South, gets involved with Charisma magazine and becomes a Christian journalist.
Well, Owen, I always knew that I was a writer. I guess that was kind of the first sort of gift or talent that I recognized in my life after I got really sold out to the Lord and filled with the Holy Spirit. I started using that gift and got involved in campus ministry when I was in college and ended up working in campus ministry for several years. And while I was doing that, I actually started creating a publication for students that was distributed on college campuses, like an evangelistic type of newspaper. And from that experience, the publisher of Charisma sort of found out about my work and kept offering me the job. And so finally I picked up and moved my wife and kids to Orlando way back in the early 90s and worked there for I was on staff at Charisma for 18 years. So it was the bulk of my young adult career. Yeah.
Wow, that's extraordinary. And would you say that some of the skills, the lessons you learned there have carried over and help you today as you do missions work, as you continue to write? How has that influenced how you do ministry today?
Well, I mean, I never really stopped writing after I went into ministry. Writing has always been a huge part of what I do. I just finished my 7th book.
Wow.
I write a column for Charisma every week. A lot of what I do, I guess I kind of put it in writing first. And so I really believe in the importance of the printed page and how God uses that. But I also knew back in the late 90s that I was sort of living in a comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can get comfortable in our spot, our comfortable career spot. And the Lord was showing me that he was calling me to do some bigger things that were scary and way outside of sitting behind a computer and working in an office. And so he was showing me that I was going to be preaching, traveling, doing mission work. And I struggled with that for a while because I had to deal with my own insecurities and fears. And, I think a lot of us, we allow those things to keep us limited. So long story short, 1998, I ended up kneeling face down on the floor in a church in Orlando. And I surrendered to that. And I prayed a very dangerous prayer. I call it the most dangerous prayer in the Bible, from Isaiah 6, verse 9 and 10, where Isaiah said, "Here am I, Lord, send me." And when I prayed that, the Lord took me seriously. And, long story short, 36 countries later, I'm sitting here with work going on in about 11, serious work going on in about 11 of those countries, and traveling a lot.
Wow.
So yeah, God really takes us seriously when we say yes.
Wow. I mean, that was quite a transition for you. You're going from probably what was a pretty steady job at Charisma magazine, and you're saying, "Yes, Lord, send me." Did you know instantly that it was the missions? Did you instantly know that you were going into the field that you now currently do with Mordecai Project?
I mean, at the moment that I surrendered, I had a very profound, I would call it a vision, that I saw myself standing in front of this gigantic audience of people who were all African.
Wow.
And so I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to Africa. But I didn't know what that would look like or how that would work. Ended up, I went to Nigeria 10 times. We have work in Uganda, in Kenya, in Malawi, in Tanzania, and I've been to South Africa and was planning to go to Congo before the pandemic, and I will still go there when we can work out the details. So,
Wow.
yeah, I didn't know. The short answer is no. I did not know what it would look like, but I had a sense that I was going to be pulled out of my boring day-to-day job, and it was going to be an adventure, and it definitely has been.
Well, let me dig a little bit on that, because I'm like you, I work with a lot of young leaders, and sometimes they get this unction of the Holy Spirit as God's calling me to do this. And sometimes you get that vision, like you had that vision. Hey, you just felt like you were going to be in that room or have that group of people you're going to be preaching to, but you're in a church in Orlando and you're having this moment with God. What do you think, or what advice would you give to people practically? What's the next step that they should do with that? Do they go quit their jobs, their careers, everything like that the next day? Or like what would you say to that young leader that's having that moment at this time?
Sure. Yeah, I didn't quit anything at that point. I held on to that. I knew that God spoke to me, but I also, I guess I kind of intuitively understood that you don't try to make God's will or fulfill God's will on your own, and you certainly don't do it in the flesh.
Mm,
I had to wait for God to open the doors. I had to wait for Him to clarify what this was all about, and the the initiative really is on Him. I mean, He is the one who's doing this. I'm just the willing vessel. So if He had said, quit your job, I would have done that. But all I knew was God was going to do this. And so I waited. And I think let's capitalize that word wait, because I think a
mm,
lot of people, that's where we mess up.
wow.
I think that's where Abraham messed up when God gave him the promise of a child, and then when it didn't happen on his timetable, he decided to try to do it on his own, and
Mm,
that's not the way to do it. So waiting, and then the doors will open. If God's in it, he will do it. So when I started getting invitations, and then somebody said, "Would you come to Nigeria?"
mm,
and they sent me a ticket, it was pretty obvious
yeah.
that God was making the way for this.
Wow. And one of the things that kind of that ties in with that is people distinguishing what is the call of God and what is the Lord speaking, and sometimes what's emotional, what's maybe more of my desire in comparison to what actually God is speaking to me and telling me to do. And how would you advise young leaders? It's all frameworks and ages of life, but how did they distinguish that between, is this God, or did I eat bad tacos last night before I went to bed?
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of opens the door to talk about why we need other people in our life,
Mm-hmm.
because we're not doing this on our own. And I don't advise any young leader to live in isolation or to be separate from the people that God has put in your life to help you. And that would be, spiritual leaders, pastors, mentors, as well as those close friends that God puts in
Mm-hmm.
our life. I don't believe David would have fulfilled his calling if it hadn't been for Jonathan.
Mm.
God
Wow.
provided a friend, a big brother, if you will, to step in and help him And so when we're going through those questions about our callings, about our future, we should obviously we pray, and obviously we seek to hear God's voice, and we have to hear God's voice for ourselves. But we need those confirmations and those cautions that we get from friends who may or mentors who may say, I don't really see that happening right now, or maybe you need to wait, or maybe you need to don't quit your job yet. We need those voices in our life, voices of wisdom that will help us along the way. I'm so grateful that I always had that in my life. And I'm always telling people to make sure you value the relationships in your life, and to make sure you have that support network.
Wow, that's amazing. I know I'm going a little bit off script here with you, Lee, today, because I just think that this is really so pivotal in so many people's lives. But then there's the aspect, there was one article I read on church leadership this year that talked about 2021 being a year of transition for so many people in ministry. That is a knock-on effect of what happened in 2020 with COVID, and people kind of getting upended by the magnitude of what took place, and just wanting to get out, of the valley moment, wanting to get out of, man, this is not what I thought it would look like. This is not what I expected out of ministry. Maybe there's something better out there, or something more on the horizon that I could deal with. And maybe it's pinpointing it, like that valley season, making decisions in the valley. Can we make decisions in the valley? Is it a healthy place to make decisions in the valley? In terms of transitioning between different places. Would you have anything to say to that?
Well, I always tell people to never make decisions when you're discouraged. And if you're going through a downtime, a depressed time, a lean time, a discouraged time, I mean, God can speak to us and he sustains us in those times. But I don't think that we should be quick to make big life-changing decisions when we're down.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be, rejoicing. We need to be in faith. We need to be full of hope for the future when we make those decisions. I've seen people really walk through shipwreck because they made decisions when they were just, down. The devil had them pinned to the floor, and they were defeated, and then they made a decision. So I would definitely advise not doing that. Make sure you're in a place of faith and encouragement when you seek to hear God about your future.
And ministry is taxing. I mean, we see the effects of that, all throughout the ministry circles. That it's taxing. There's pressure that comes from different situations. Well, what would you say for people who are going through that valley season? What have you gained in your experience of steps that people should take and saying, okay, I know I'm feeling the oppression, maybe it's my mind, maybe it's the enemy attacking me, maybe it's various different things that are taking place in my life. What are some things that you have learned to do as you kind of walk through that season in life?
Well, of course, for me, the number one thing I do is I hide in God. I mean, I find the cleft in the rock and I go there.
Amen.
David talked about, being in the secret place. And I just think that is like so important. There's a reason why the book of Psalms is in the very middle of the Bible, because it is the core of the Christian life. Praise, worship, intimacy with God, that has to be the very core of our life. So I have to hide in that place, and I know that that's where he's going to speak to me. But it's also where I find encouragement, hope, sustaining grace. I mean, it's just where I get what I have to have. So I hide in God, but I also don't hide from people. I think that's actually
That's
a
powerful.
thing to do.
That's
Because
powerful.
a lot of us want to do that. We want to be like Elijah and go hide in a cave when Jezebel is chasing us. And one of the things that God said to Elijah when he was in the cave was, come out here. He called him out of the cave. And that was where he heard the still small voice.
So good.
So I have friends, we've had long discussions about the fact that they have a tendency to crawl into their bear cave, we call it, when they're down and withdraw. All of a sudden there's no text, there's no phone calls, there's no communication whatsoever. That is very dangerous. I
Wow.
don't think that's a healthy place. We need to be talking to each other. We need to be processing what's going on. We need to have not with everybody, but we need the friends and the mentors, the people that we trust, that we can go to and say, I'm hurting right now. Would you pray with me? And we pray for each other. We sustain one another through these hard times. And that's a big mistake that a lot of, not just young people make, a lot of older leaders make that and live isolated lives and go off the grid for a while. And I have friends who, I just know if I don't hear from them over a period of 3 weeks, something's wrong because they're not talking when they're going through those times. And we need to be able to process.
Wow, that's powerful. I love that thought that like solitude is not the same as isolation and isolating yourself away. And it kind of brings me on to another aspect that you're very passionate about, which is relational discipleship. I've been to Bull Ventures conferences, and I can see that this is an outflow of the ministry that takes place is relational discipleship. And it's interesting because Jesus did, he didn't tell his disciples to go and build large ministries or go and produce albums or all that exterior stuff. He asked us to go make disciples. And what does that look like today? What does relational discipleship mean to you, and why is it so important?
Yeah, well, it's important to me because I see it in the Word, and I know that is the New Testament biblical model for how we're supposed to be reproducing God's life in others. But in our current, in the American or the Western Christian mindset, we so typically we're all about big. We worship big. We love big. We want crowds. We want the big stage. We're all enamored with that. 1 million followers, and it's all about numbers. And that's just not what the Bible says is important.
Mm,
The New Testament really shows us that quality is more important than quantity.
mm,
So Jesus, even though he did preach to crowds, he spent most of his time with a few. He invested in a small group of 12 men. He invested in a small group of women. He had a small group of 70 that he trained to do healing and deliverance. And most of his time was with those people.
mm,
And then when you look around the world today and you see all the Christianity that has been produced, it all came from that small number of people.
mm,
So the biblical model is you invest a lot of time in one person, and then they become like you, like Jesus, and they become strong and powerful, and they become a mature believer, and then they're able to reproduce as well. That's what Paul did in Timothy's life, and then Timothy did the same.
mm.
And so many years ago, I made a very intentional decision that I'm going to do that. And so I just started investing my life in young people, young guys mostly. And they would come to me when they found out that I was doing that, and they were hungry for it. And this is
Wow.
a fatherless generation that a lot of them didn't have dads or role models. And so they're hungry for it. And so now I'm just trying to keep up, pouring my life into them. And then they are starting to do it as well. And it's wonderful to see them, even go beyond me. That's the goal, is I want them to surpass me. So that's just what I'm doing as a Christian, whether you're a preacher or a doctor or a school teacher or a janitor, it doesn't matter. We should all be doing that. That's what the mandate from Jesus is, to go and make disciples. We're all called to do that. And I think a lot of times we have this mentality that we think it's the pastor's job, or it's the associate pastor's job, or it's a paid full-time minister's job to make disciples while we just do our thing. But we need to get back to the New Testament model.
Wow, it's amazing that even you say, like, when you begin to operate at that level, you see that there's a hunger out there, that people are actually craving that type of mentorship, discipleship that's out there. And I've no stones in my hand, but certainly through social media, through maybe some of the more popularized church that's seen visually online and stuff today, as ministers, we can get a false idea into how we do that type of ministry. And maybe just examining that a little bit more, because you said sometimes it's hard just to keep up with it. Is there sacrifice in that? What's the cost on not just being a disciple? What's the cost on doing discipleship with people around you? What should pastors know about this before they step into it, what it's going to cost them?
Well, I have a lot of people say to me, well, I'm really too busy to make disciples. And I say, well, then you're too busy, because that's our mandate. So this is really not supposed to be an option. This is what we're all called to do. But making disciples requires time, Time. That's what it's all about. And so my schedule, my life is totally wrecked because of discipleship. I spend so much time investing in people through phone calls, through meetings, through small groups, through Zoom meetings, through WhatsApp. And because I travel, I have people that I connect with and relate to internationally. So I have to relate to them, which means, like next week when I train a small group of leaders in Sri Lanka, I have to do that in the early morning so that they can be watching it in the evening. So, there's all kinds of things that you do to adjust your life to the people and their needs, and that's called sacrifice, and that's called serving. But that's what discipleship requires. Jesus spent 3.5 years of his life pouring into those people, and a lot of his time was with them. And constant. I mean, they walked together, they lived together, they traveled together, they ate together, they were nonstop, they were together. And those people who were closest to Jesus became like him, because he imparted God's life to them. And that's what we do. So the answer to your question is, when you surrender to intentional discipleship, you might as well just tear up your schedule and let God rewrite it, because it's not going to be what you had before.
And it's such an unpopular way of life these days, especially in this American culture, as you use the phrase, adjust your life for others. It's so abnormal to maybe the philosophy of this Western mindset. But let me even ask you about this, because in 2020, a lot of things did go online. We're able to do this Zoom interview online today, but is that the future of discipleship? Is that the future of the church? Is everything moving online? Is that the repercussion of what took place in 2020? Or do you feel like there's aspects that we need to be cautious with?
Well, I don't think everything is moving to Zoom, but the truth is, all throughout church history, we've had to improvise, and we haven't always been able to do face-to-face. I mean, the reason why we have the epistles of the Apostle Paul is because he couldn't be with them, so he wrote to them. Sometimes he was in prison when he wrote to them. And he conveyed his heart through that medium, and that's why we have the New Testament, because he would have gone and said all those things to them in person. I'm kind of in a way glad that Paul ended up getting arrested so often, because if he hadn't been made to sit down, he probably wouldn't have written those things.
So good.
Uh, but when Paul wrote to them, he would say things like, "I long to be with you." And I know that pain too, because when I speak with my disciples, whether they're in Florida or Illinois or India or Romania, I mean, I shed tears because I love these people,
Mm-hmm.
and I see them on a screen like I'm looking at you right now. And I'm like, I wish that we could actually be sitting down and having coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'll do with my friend Helgi from Iceland is he'll get his coffee and I'll get mine, and we're on Zoom together or FaceTime or whatever, and it's kind of like being together. And the Apostle Paul would have loved to have had that,
Sure.
because all he had was
Wow.
writing on parchment. So I'm grateful that we have this today. Do I prefer in person better? Yes. But I'm grateful that we do have this technology, and it's just another sign to me of how soon the Lord's going to be coming back. It's like everything's accelerating, and because of the world population, and we've got so many people to reach for Jesus, the Lord has enabled us with this technology to disciple people this way. Just a few weeks ago, for 3 Fridays in a row, I did training with a group of young church leaders. They're all Filipino. They are in 16 churches in Singapore, Hong Kong, Canada, and Australia, and the
Wow.
Philippines. And they were all on Zoom, and I was training them in discipleship for 3 Fridays. It was Friday morning for me, it was Friday evening for them. And, that wouldn't have been possible a few years ago. And I think we'll still do things like that after COVID. But I'm kind of grateful COVID actually forced me to do Zoom, because I didn't even know about Zoom before COVID.
Right.
And so now I will definitely use it as a tool from this point, and it won't be because of a pandemic.
Do you think that there's some things that the church at large should not go back to post-COVID? Is there something that we've learned through this that you think should stay intact?
I think we should never wear masks again. And I don't like social distancing. Let's don't put any more ropes in the church. Let's don't keep people apart from each other. Let's don't tell people they can't hug. I need 7 hugs a day. So, I will be so glad when all of that is behind us, because I don't think that, it was healthy for us in that we weren't getting the virus. But once the threat of a virus is gone, I don't think we should be trying to stay away from each other. But I do think that we've learned through COVID that some of the things we were doing before were not fruitful or effective. And Jesus said he's going to prune us so that we may bear more fruit. And I think a lot of pastors and leaders over this last 15 months have identified things that need to change, and they're getting rid of those things. I heard a pastor recently say, "We're not ever going to use another paper bulletin again."
Hmm.
Now, most of the churches I've ever gone to, we didn't do paper bulletins, but some churches do. And this pastor said, "We just realized it was a waste of paper. Nobody looks at it, and they weren't giving them out in COVID because of infection, but
Hmm.
they stopped from this point." And so I think there's a lot of things like that we are realizing, okay, let's don't do it that way again. And let's learn from our experience, and let's let God prune that so that we can bear more fruit.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. Thank you, Lee. That's amazing stuff. Let me just shift gears and talk a little bit about Mordecai Project, because that is kind of probably what takes up a large amount of your time right now is this ministry. That is It is a humanitarian ministry. It is fighting injustice, fighting against cultural norms that cause oppression. Tell us about it. Tell us how you got involved. Like what's the scope of it, and why are you so passionate about these cultural injustices that you see throughout the world?
Sure. Yeah, the Mordecai Project is a Christian humanitarian organization that I founded in 2003 that is focusing on taking the healing of Jesus Christ to women and girls around the world, particularly in developing countries where they are suffering from various forms of oppression, discrimination, or abuse. And so, what we do is when I go into a country and I work with the local church in a community, we identify what the main problem is, and then we look for a way to meet the need. And so that might be a domestic violence shelter, for example. We're building a domestic violence shelter in Rio Hondo, Guatemala, and it will be the only uh, women's shelter for domestic abuse victims in the whole state of Zacapa, Guatemala.
Hmm.
And the government is going to be actually referring people to our shelter.
Wow.
In Masindi, Uganda, for example, we have a women's empowerment center where women who have been abandoned by their husbands and they have no way to really feed their families, they didn't have any skills. We have basically been teaching them about 4 different ways to have businesses. There is a pig farm. They raise pigs. We have a vegetable farm. We have a sewing, tailoring training center, and we've just purchased 30 sewing machines. The women, if they go through the 6-month course, they get a sewing machine and they start their own business in their home. And so the Lord is using that to help them to break out of the cycle of poverty. In Kenya, we just completed a girls' dormitory at a Christian school so that the girls don't have to be pulled out of school so
Wow.
often, which usually happens in Africa. And then we just launched a new ministry in Pakistan. It's also a sewing, tailoring ministry, but the women are coming to the sewing center. They are making tote bags, which we are selling in the United States, and the sale of those bags is providing their living wage so that they can feed their families. So these are some of the examples of the types of projects that we're doing. And of course, in each situation, the women are being discipled and discipling their kids and, finding Jesus. In Pakistan, Muslim women are very curious about what's happening in our center and are coming around and receiving help. And the Lord's using that to open a door for them to come to know Christ. So we're focusing on this particular need, but it's a way to fulfill the Great Commission and to also heal the brokenhearted.
Well, I hope our listeners are just encouraged even hearing that, because that is, I mean, that's the hands and feet of Jesus in operation around the world, and just amazing to hear it. I always love to take an opportunity with people who've been in ministry for years and just ask them, give us a testimony, give us a story, tell us something that you've seen the hand of God providentially, miraculously happen in your life that makes you go, wow, just look at God's faithfulness in my life and in what happened. Can you give us maybe just a little testimony of something that you've seen that God, just to encourage the listeners today?
Well, I probably would want to tell about a healing that happened when I was in a city called Barranquilla, Colombia. This was a few years ago when I was preaching in a women's conference there. There was about 500 women in this large church, and while I was teaching on the Samaritan woman and Jesus ministering to her, uh, I remember I was not praying for the sick. I was not laying hands on anybody. But while I was preaching from that passage in John 4, a woman felt this warmth go through her body and she was instantly healed. She had been gang raped years before by 12 men, and she had all kinds of problems, urinary tract problems, urinary infections, and she had not been able to urinate without pain for many, many years. And from that moment, she was able to urinate without pain. She was completely healed of that. And when I went back the next year to that same place, I found that she had made her testimony on a DVD, and she was giving out her testimony to people on buses in the city, just because she was
Wow.
so profoundly affected, and she
That's
wanted to especially let the women of her city know that Jesus cares about them and wants to heal their pain. That story kind of is a beautiful example of what our ministry is all about.
yeah.
But it also encouraged me greatly about just the power of God and His power to heal, and how much He cares about somebody who happened to have been sitting in the back of the room. And I love the fact that a lot of times in the Bible, the person who's in the back ends up getting the attention of Jesus. And that's what I feel like we're doing, is that we're shining the light of Jesus on the people who are on the edge and who are in the back and who are forgotten, is that He cares about them too.
Wow, that's incredible. What an amazing, amazing testimony. And I hope you're okay with me asking this. But I have to ask you, as your time as a journalist, you had the opportunity to interview one of our presidents in person. I think it was George W. Bush. Can you just give us a little bit of what that was like of an experience for you?
Well, yeah, a lot of people know that I interviewed him because they've seen a picture of me with him. Um, Let me back up and say that, first of all, I interviewed his father, George H.W. Bush, when he was in the White House. I was a part of a small group of journalists that got to go in and do a press conference with with Bush number one.
Wow.
And then when I was at Charisma, we were doing a cover story on the election. And George W. Bush was not yet the president. He was running for president against Al Gore. And I put in a request for an interview with him, and they allowed me to ride on his campaign plane. We've had to fly from Austin, Texas to Portland, Maine, and I was on the plane with a bunch of journalists. But at the last 45 minutes of the flight, they allowed me to go up to the front of the plane, and I sat with him in the front of the plane for 35 minutes and had a personal conversation with him in an interview, which was very, very special, of course.
Wow.
I felt like I was with somebody who was a new believer. He definitely had, a real, genuine faith. He talked about his experience talking to Billy Graham and how he prayed to receive Jesus and how he made that decision, how he got free from alcohol addiction through that. And then he talked a lot about how he's loved to read the Bible every day. I
Wow.
remember giving him a Psalm 72. I suggested that he read that, which he wrote down the reference. I don't know if he did, but that was a psalm that I was using to pray for him. And then, of course, he was elected in November. So, yeah, that was a one of those memorable moments in my career at Charisma. I wouldn't say that it was my favorite interview, but it was right up there with, like, one of those life-changing moments.
Do you have any regrets in ministry?
Man, I'm not prepared to answer that one. Regrets. I guess I would just say, for the benefit of all the young leaders who are listening, because you talked, Owen, a moment ago about we talked about the importance of waiting, and when we're going through those seasons of wondering, and when's the next step, when's the next thing going to happen. I think it's really important for us to enjoy the journey and to enjoy every moment that we're walking with Jesus. And if I had any regret, I think it's that I did not purposefully, intentionally enjoy the moment that I was in. Sometimes I was so focused
Wow.
on when's the next thing going to happen, and when's the next door going to open, and what's the next thing, and being impatient. I think that I lost the ability to just smell the roses and enjoy those boring moments of life, those conversations and those relationships and those times when maybe nothing real exciting is happening, but actually there's a lot of good around us, and I think we need to savor that. And I would just say to everybody who's young, who's impatient, to relax and just, smell the coffee. Enjoy the journey and don't be in such a hurry to go to the next thing.
Wow. Well, I know that was a left of field question for you, but that was a profound answer, and I appreciate that so much. This is my last question to you, and then I want maybe on the heels of this question, you could just let us know about how people can get involved with Mordecai Project and how people can stay connected with you, Lee. But this is maybe an unusual way to finish the conversation. But when I was at one of the Bold Ventures conferences, it was something simple, but it was profound to me. You talked about just fitness, and you talked about wanting to be able to go as far as you can for as long as you can for God's kingdom. Why is that important, and why should we think about even things like our own fitness when we balance that with our faith and our life of ministry?
Sure. Oh, I would love to answer that question. So when I was 57 years old, by the way, I'm 62 now. I'll be 63 next month. When I was 57, I had this kind of epiphany moment where I looked around and I saw a lot of guys in ministry my age. They were not doing well physically. They were overweight. They were sick. They were going into the hospital. They were having to cancel things. And, and I thought, I'm too young to have to do that. So I just got real intentional. I changed my eating habits because 80% of fitness is about what you eat. And then I joined the gym and I started working out. And because I travel so much, I also developed a body weight fitness plan that I can do wherever I am. I don't have to be in my gym. And so I got things under control, and I feel good. I am healthy, and the reason why I did that is not so I can compete in any weightlifting competition. That's not my goal at all. I just want to be healthy so that I can make more disciples. And I want to live a long life so that I can make the maximum impact. So that's what motivates me. Is I just want to make every year count. As long as I have breath in my body, I want to be able to invest. And it was funny. 2 weeks ago, I was with these Russian guys in New Jersey. They were all in their early 20s, and one of the guys had built a gym and in his back of his house. And I said, "Hey, let's just go over there. I need to work out." So they came with me. And these young guys in their 20s were huffing and puffing with me. They were laughing because I was setting the pace. And I'm not, Mr. Athletic, but I just feel like it's important. And I want to say to all the young people listening that, you may think because you're 25, that you're indestructible, but you need to take care of yourself now, especially with all of the eating options that we have today and so much unhealthy fast food. We need to eat healthy and exercise so that you do not have to pay for it later. And then you mentioned my ministry. I would just say the easiest thing for people to do is if they go to leegrady.com. My website is divided into 3 sections, but if you go there, you'll see it all. You'll see everything about the Mordecai Project. You'll see all of the things that we're doing in the various countries. There's an option to donate to any of those projects, but also you'll learn about the books and about the columns that I write, and also my travel schedule is on there. So thank you so much for letting me connect everybody to that.
Absolutely, of course. And we'll try and put links to those as well on the show notes as well, so people can connect and be a part of what Lee continues to do in the ministry that you're doing around the world. And I just say personally, thank you just for your dedication to the ministry and to the work that God is doing throughout the world, for the conferences that you're putting on. And we just believe that God's got great things in store. So Lee, thank you so much for being with us on Beyond Sunday today.
Hey, it's a blessing to be here. Thanks.
And God bless everyone who's tuned in today. Please continue to share out and like this podcast. Until next time, we'll see you soon.